Hello friends, welcome to Professor Asma's Guide to Unusual Knowledge, otherwise known as PEGTUC by its acronym. Today we're looking at sort of the ultimate, not in unusual knowledge, but really in unknowledge, which is not the same as ignorance. Today we'll be talking about something that theologians have called the Cloud of Unknowing, which might, in my mind, be the most charming phrase I've ever heard. The Cloud of Unknowing. Okay, this is a story of divine darkness, as it is also called. It is basically the idea that you can't know God directly, or the divine realm directly. You can only sort of know this mysterious darkness. And your job is to love that anyway. Welcome. Okay, our story starts in the Acts of the Apostles, which is a part of the Bible, where St. Paul is going around sort of converting people to Christianity. And at one point, he's talking to a bunch of learned people, and he talks to them about Jesus and sort of the mystery of Christianity, and he converts a very smart Greek named Dionysius. And this is Dionysius the Areopagite, because that's where he's from. It's a very quick passage. It goes by very quickly, and there's no more discussion of it. People wondered for a long time, who is that? Who was it that turned towards this new theology when they were already very educated in the old ways of the pagans and so forth? And so it remained a big question mark. And then many years later, like 400 years later, 500 years later, these texts start to appear around the Mediterranean, in Europe, and they are basically attributed to someone who's calling himself this same Dionysius the Areopagite. Scholars came to basically call this set of teachings and this thinker Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite. So now you now have a real mouthful, very important in the rise of mysticism in the West. And he's basically like this ancient, big gun OG of Christian mystical tradition who sort of codified what we call apophatic theology. And apophatic just means like you can't have knowledge of it or experience of God or the divine. It's an approach of knowing what God is not rather than knowing what God is. So, according to Pseudo-Dionysius, God is better characterized and approached by negations rather than affirmations. Pseudo-Dionysius basically uses a complex theory of signification, insisting on divine silence, darkness, and unknowing. And so, like you would see in traditional, what's called cataphatic theology, you'd give traits to God. You'd say, well, God is love, or God is justice, or God is a jealous God. In all these cases, you're making positive attributions to God. But Pseudo-Dionysius and this mystical tradition that follows after him is saying that's the wrong way to go about it. God is so much bigger than that you can't use any of these kinds of attributes. You certainly can't use anthropomorphic stuff like God is jealous or God loves. You have to basically also avoid any kind of positive attributes, even something that might be logical or vaguely scientific. You've got to basically treat God as completely unknowable. So in this sort of mystical theology, they basically argue that every positive name given to God must be transcended. You ultimately ascend by a way of denial, like you say, God is not good or bad. God is not just or unjust. God is not logical or illogical. So imagine you're trying to describe like a sun in the middle of the desert at high noon. You say it's hot, it's bright, it burns the eyes. But these mystics like Dionysius would say, stop describing, turn off your mind. The sun is beyond the ability of your mind. This is the analogy. I suppose there's really like precedent for this in Plato, because the sun, and also in the Hermetic tradition of Hermes Trismegistus and the sort of Pythagoreans, all the pagans saw the sun, if we're using this as a metaphor, as like the brightest, not just symbol of truth, but it's sort of like a manifestation of God. It's the closest manifestation of God that you have in the physical universe. So there's a kind of lot of sun worshiping. But if you think about it, you can't look at the sun for obvious reasons. And these mystics are sort of making the same point. You know it's there, you know it's all powerful, but you can't know anything about it, just like you can't look into the sun. So some people will then talk about it as like a black sun or the dark sun. You'll see this come up in alchemy traditions too. So the moment you think you know God by your words, you've boxed him in. You can't say him either, obviously. There's no gender application here. So you switch the lights off and you just enter the darkness. And that's the pathway. So now, let's fast forward to the 14th century in England. There's a Carthusian monk who writes a wonderful book called The Cloud of Unknowing. And we don't know who this monk is. It's an anonymous work. I don't think this monk would ever have the pretension or pomposity to put his name on the thing. It's just classic devotional culture of monasticism. But this little handbook is sort of about contemplative prayer and this new mode of contemplative prayer. It draws heavily on this kind of Dionysian apophatic tradition that I'm describing. So here's a couple of key lines. Quote, "We cannot think our way to God. He can be loved, but not thought." End quote. So you can love this thing, but you can't think about it because you can't wrap any concepts around it. Here's another quote. "If you wish to enter into this cloud, just as the cloud of unknowing lies above you, so you must fashion a cloud of forgetting beneath you, between you and every created thing." End quote. So this is I just love this imagery. I just think it's wonderful. What the author suggests is beneath the cloud of forgetting, that's how you let go of all creatures and all thoughts. And above this, the cloud of unknowing, that's basically where you can direct your love of God. It's not cognition or philosophy that you're doing, it's something else. The intellect can help you get to the edge of this cloud of unknowing, but then it must silence itself. That's the idea. So picture yourself hiking up a mountain. First you pack your bags, and that's like scripture, dogma, theology. Then you reach a point where you must leave the map behind. The cloud is that point. You're above the map and you're like in the mist. The view is kind of blank from this position though. The air though is clearer, if we can keep this metaphor going. And that's the mystery, that's the mystical. I mean, later philosophers sort of made fun of this. David Hume was saying, well, mysticism where God has no content whatsoever, you might as well be an atheist. So he couldn't really appreciate it. But I think the monk is sort of saying, just don't think too much, love instead. And I think that is sort of a central message within, it's the higher theology, if you could put it that way. And that's what's sort of radical about the Cloud of Unknowing, especially like in our culture where we're like, you should always know more, you should always have more information, post more, brand more. The cloud says like, unknow things, sit quiet, just be. This tradition is also expressed beautifully in the Islamic tradition of the Sufis. And there's a wonderful philosopher, Suhrawardi, who basically develops the illuminationist school of mysticism. And so this is a Persian philosophy, and it's from the 12th century. According to this tradition, reality is like a hierarchy of light. So ultimately, the primal light is like beyond the sun. It's beyond any description, and it can't be cognitively known, but it is experienced directly through a kind of, sensus divinitatis or something. This Sufi philosopher Suhrawardi thought that this ultimate light is basically a kind of emanation of the divine. So all created light, like my intelligence, your intelligence, our souls, these are sort of reflections or little sparks of this divine light. And this is sort of the cool thing about Suhrawardi, is darkness is not evil per se, it's the absence of light. And to approach the primal light, you must transcend the luminous images and you have to go into this darkness. The scenario is that God emanates out the universe, but before it does this, as a kind of expression of itself, it basically draws itself in and creates a kind of void, or like a kind of divine darkness. And then it spills forth all of reality into that divine darkness. And so as you meditate and engage in these transcendental practices, like for Sufis, it would be like art and poetry and whirling dervishes, you get closer and closer to that divine darkness, on the other side of which is the one, the ultimate God. And so this goal of being illuminated is a kind of inner voyage that is a microcosm of the macrocosm. Think of a lantern like in a foggy night. You light it and you can see the fog all around very well. But if you want to see the stars, you have to extinguish the lantern. So Suhrawardi says the lantern is like your concepts and your images and your metaphors. The stars and beyond them, that's like the primal light that's beyond description. So the darkness you step into isn't like a defeat. It's not a failure. It's the empty field where the actual revelation happens. All right, what are we really talking about here? There's sort of three traditions, all sort of conveying the same core idea. You approach the ultimate by letting go of everything you think you know. This is technically called via negativa, or the way of the negative, the way of negation. You say, the divine is not this, and it's not that, and it's not this, and it's not that. And so what you're arriving at is pure mystery. Via negativa says, all that you name, you must strip away. And the God that you're describing, like in these holy texts and stories, that's not the real God you want to meet. The real God is the one beyond that. So the Cloud of Unknowing and Suhrawardi, they inject this practice, basically, which is this switch from thinking about God to being with God in this cloud of unknowing. And why this matters, I guess, is again, I think we live in this world obsessed with clarity, with concept, with meta-narrative, with brands. And these traditions, that I'm describing here, they're inviting ambiguity, darkness, resting, uncertainty. And in a culture of constant content, unknowing sort of becomes radical. And also, like, we live in a pretty assertive culture too. And I think the silence of this tradition is itself a kind of protest. So that's another aspect of this that I really like. Maybe you don't need another answer. Maybe you need another posture. Maybe the cloud is the space between you and the noise, between you and your devices. Maybe unknowing is less failure and more of an opening. So how can you actually do some of these practices? They're forms of meditation. In the Cloud of Unknowing, the one by the Carthusian monk, he says, like, choose a one-syllable word like love or God and sit quietly. And this is a kind of tool of desire. You just kind of focus on it and keep bringing the mind back to it over and over again. And you want to let go of images and thoughts and even sort of spiritual goals. So there's some parallel here with like Buddhist forms of mindfulness, I think, too. Notice the cloud of forgetting beneath you, sort of let go of all creatures of your mind, all the contents of your mind, and also the cloud of unknowing above you, let go of wanting to know the divine. And then reflect, like, what ideas about the divine sort of keep you busy, and which ones might you let go of. So I guess for me, the big takeaway from this tradition is that, unknowing is not defeat. It's basically a kind of threshold. It's liminal. It's kind of it's a doorway, as it were, this cloud of unknowing. And I wonder, when was the last time you sat with your own unknowing? So I'm going to try that today. We're practicing Professor Asma's Guide to Unusual Unknowing. Get it? You should try it too and see what it does for you, just sort of emptying the mind with this idea that there's still a kind of divine darkness that you can kind of experience and have a longing for, but not ever expect to break through or decode. So embrace the mystery, rest in the darkness, and I will see you back here on the other side of the Cloud of Unknowing next week on Professor Asma's Guide to Unusual Knowledge. Always stay curious.